You know, the Republican Party has given itself all over to the great narcissistic father, Donald Trump. The Democratic Party has continued to allow it to happen by and large. That has got to change. The way that tech companies work, they are authoritarian places that masquerade as socially open places. My favorite example of this is the open floor in Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg's office in Facebook is a glass cube. And he sits on an open floor surrounded by several hundred programmers. It's Foucault's panopticon. And all the programmers are on the ground there. And the fantasy is we're all in this together, we're just collaborating. But the fact is that Mark Zuckerberg has stock options that give him 100% personal, individual, king-like control of Facebook. Social media call themselves techniques of connection, but they are in fact mining operations. And they are the first of a series of mining operations. Today we have cryptocurrency, we have AI. These are mining operations. Those mining operations mine the social world, but they also mine the natural world. And for that, an authoritarian regime makes good sense.
Fred Turner, c'est une figure très importante de la critique des technologies. Le professeur américain a d'abord été journaliste pendant 10 ans, il a ensuite enseigné au MIT, puis à Harvard, et il est aujourd'hui professeur dans l'une des prestigieuses universités californiennes, l'université de Stanford, qui se situe en plein cœur de la Silicon Valley. On lui doit d'ailleurs des textes très importants sur les origines politiques et culturelles de la tech. Je pense en particulier à son texte « Aux sources de l'utopie numérique, de la contre-culture à la cyberculture » qui a paru en 2006 et qui est traduit en français par les éditions CEF. Alors plus récemment, Fred Turner, il a analysé la mutation de ce que deux chercheurs, Barbrook et Cameron, ont nommé dans les années 90 l'idéologie californienne. Cette idéologie californienne, elle a aujourd'hui muté pour donner naissance à ce que Fred Turner appelle l'idéologie texane. Et cette mutation, elle est autant territoriale qu'économique et bien évidemment politique. Alors ma première question, c'est bien sûr, est-ce que lui-même parlerait de technofascisme? Est-ce qu'il endosse cette étiquette qui est aujourd'hui au centre d'un débat sur les mutations idéologiques contemporaines de la tech? Réponse tout de suite dans cette vidéo pour Synth Media.
So let's jump right in. Do you endorse, given your experience and work on tech, do you endorse the label technofascism?
I wish I didn't have to endorse the label technofascism, but I do. I think it's exactly right. And the way to understand technofascism, I think, is to understand it as the merger of two movements. One, the rise of a Christian nationalist, authoritarian, political and cultural movement in the United States, anchored in white nationalism, in the myth of a forgotten and lost America, anchored in racism, anchored in all of the modes of prejudice that we know from earlier generations of fascism. And that fascism has lately come together with technological techniques from Silicon Valley that the movement can use and that the tech folks can use together to surveil American people, to categorize American people, and to do the work of oppressing American people. And that's technofascism. Technofascism, in my view, is the collision of an already existing culture and political movement and a new set of technologies. You might ask, why would the technologists want to be with the fascists? Well, you know, they need government contracts, they need deregulation, and they have techniques that are enormously powerful. The government gives them all of those opportunities. So yeah, I think we're in a new moment, and I think technofascism is the right label. I wish I didn't, but I do.
There's also a commonplace I would like to have your opinion on, is this idea that Silicon Valley has always been a progressive force. This idea has been discussed here in France. Sylvie Laurent, who teaches here at Sciences Po, talks about a counter-revolution from Silicon Valley, or even Becca Lewis at
my
Stanford.
Student.
Yeah.
So
she's been writing extensively about the right-wing roots of Silicon Valley. Can you walk me through a bit of this history of acquaintances between these tech leaders and these reactionary beliefs?
Right, okay. So it's a little bit tricky. The traditional Silicon Valley that we might have thought of in the 1990s was a fairly utopian place. And it had a belief that was anti-institutional and anti-political, but not authoritarian. So this is people like Stuart Brand, the early Wired magazine. They believed that computers should be networking technologies, and if they were networked correctly, well, maybe the network could replace politics. Maybe we wouldn't need politics anymore. Now, they were not officially right-wing, but as you can imagine, a world without politics, a world without institutions, does open the door to fascism and opens the door to authoritarianism. What Becca Lewis and others have pointed out, which is very important, is that a number of the early actors in that countercultural space, once it becomes part of the tech industry of the 1990s, are themselves conservative actors. So George Gilder is someone Becca writes about a lot, very important, anti-feminist. And I've written before about how Newt Gingrich gets attached to Wired magazine, appears on its cover, and it is described as a change agent. There's a fusion that happens in the early 90s between sort of neoliberal right-wing political people like Newt Gingrich and counterculturalists whose movement has failed. The countercultural movement has kind of failed. And they say, oh, wait, look, like the people on the right, we believe that business is the right way forward. Politics is bankrupt. Individual technologies should be manufactured and used by people to enhance their freedom. And they sort of agreed not to talk about the sex, drugs, and rock and roll part of the counterculture. They sort of put that aside. And so by the mid-90s, there's a kind of libertarian countercultural fusion that Barbrook and Cameron describe as the Californian ideology. As Becca points out, there are also just hardcore right-wingers in the mix. And particularly once Peter Thiel comes on the scene, really once we enter about 2000, Thiel's a little earlier, but once we hit 2000, really conservative voices are starting to really be prominent in the Valley, not nationally, but in the Valley. So the neo-reactionary movement, the accelerationists, Curtis Yarvin starts blogging in the early 2000s. That becomes a kind of milieu out of which leaders like Peter Thiel can pull ideas, legitimacy, a sense of normalness to ideas that would have been unspeakable 20 years earlier.
And how do you explain this radicalization of Californian ideology? What is at stake to sort of grasp how these marginal radical ideas became so prominent today?
Right. I think there's two questions here. One question is, how did things change? But also another question is, how did they stay the same? The counterculturalists of the 1960s believed in separatism. They believed that they needed to go back to the land, build communes, build communities of consciousness, because that was the only way to escape a political process that had taken us into the Vietnam War. So the kind of separatism that we associate with right-wing Americans today was already alive in the counterculture. And it was a specifically techno-separatism. We were to use technologies, whether computing or LSD or stereos, to achieve a new consciousness, build a new kind of society. So that idea is already there. The other thing that happens, though, the change part, comes, I think, from a change in the technology. In the 1990s, we were very invested in building out a network. And the idea of network technology and networks of consciousness fit very nicely. Oh, look, we're making a future. It will be a better future. Let's build, 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 build. So the California ideology legitimates building the network. By the early 2000s, the network is built, and we're starting to generate lots and lots of data. And the data has value. And so companies are being formed to mine the data, extract the data, extract patterns and meaning from the data, and resell them. And this is when we get social media. Social media call themselves techniques of connection, but they are in fact mining operations. And they are the first of a series of mining operations. Today we have cryptocurrency, we have AI. These are mining operations. Those mining operations mine the social world, but they also mine the natural world. And for that, an authoritarian regime makes good sense. They begin to turn to states like Texas that have a long history of extraction, an ideological framework that makes sense of abstraction, anchored in religion, and a political structure that supports deregulation. As they begin to move to those states, they begin to adopt those ideologies. Now, okay, go ahead. No, the only thing I would say more than that is that, so I tell it like a Marxist story. The base changes and the superstructure follows. But that's not quite nuanced enough, because there are people like Peter Thiel and others who really are conservative ideologues, who really believe this and are not cynical. One last thing to say. We talk about Silicon Valley as if all of Silicon Valley was Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. Most of Silicon Valley is very ordinary people who have very ordinary progressive beliefs. The people who are the visible spokesmen for the right are very high up in the chain. I just want to make sure that we understand that it's a special group.
Yeah, absolutely. Very understood. Yeah, most of the employees tend to vote Democrat.
They vote, exactly.
And the top head, the figureheads, they're all radicalized now. Absolutely. I want to maybe have your opinion on this idea of building alternative orders.
Yeah, good.
That also touches on the fact that they are actually trying to like, this is the whole idea of secessionism. They're trying to carve new form of societies outside of the very common democratic, still a bit democratic world.
Yeah.
And these new societies are based on very authoritarian mindsets. Everything, society, governance is done by technology. There is this idea that technology can actually better administrate a society. What's your view on all those projects? Because these are not ideas anymore. They have like actually concrete, even marginal, but concrete forms, like in Honduras, like in Venezuela, like in many parts of the world.
And they're part of a much larger network of, we can think of them as sort of global offsites. As tech workers move around, they build communities. The communities are organized around values, and yet they're also organized around the fact that tech people can make a living almost anywhere. So you can go to Honduras and you can program from there, and it works. I think that the secessionist tradition is as old as America itself. And the very first pilgrims who came to Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620 were secessionists. And they came to America with the idea that they could build a special community literally under the eye of God and live in a way that the old world would not let them. That idea, that ideology permeates Silicon Valley, permeates America. America has only very recently stopped being a frontier country, 120 years. We still feel, there's still wilderness. I still have mountain lions coming down into Mountain View where I live near the headquarters of Google. So it still feels pretty wild. It still feels like I can go build my thing. And depending on the community, there's also a religious impulse and a religious orientation that makes that seem like a divine mission. So I think for some people, the divine mission is a real thing. For other people, it's a kind of secular spiritualism, where the divine, no one believes in God, no one goes to church, and yet technology itself seems to provide a kind of divine power, divine force. It seems to be magical. And perhaps we too, this fantasy goes, can become magical. Perhaps we too can leave our bodies behind somehow. We can be part of the longevity movement. We can tweak all the buttons and make ourselves beautiful machines. There's a book I love. It's about the 19th century, and it's called The Human Motor. And in this book, a historian, Anson Rabenbach, tells us that at the end of the 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution was flowering and there were machines everywhere, people began to reimagine their bodies as machines. And they began to think they have to keep their energy up. They began to think they had to train their bodies like they trained machines. We live in a time where information machines are suddenly everywhere. And I think there's a fantasy around us now that our bodies are somehow information machines. And if we treat them that way, we too can become magical. We too can become global. We too can become like bits and bytes, able to move wherever, last forever, change ourselves. And that fantasy organizes real communities. Why are they authoritarian? That's a question. I think they're authoritarian because certainly what I saw in the communes of the 1960s is that when you take institutions away, when you take bureaucracy away, what you get left with is what I've called rule by cool. The most charismatic men tend to take over. Charisma tends to be the force. So that's one element. And the most conservative parts of American society start to bubble up in that environment. The other thing is the way that tech companies work. They are authoritarian places that masquerade as socially open places. My favorite example of this is the open floor in Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg's office in Facebook is a glass cube. And he sits on an open floor surrounded by several hundred programmers. It's Foucault's panopticon. And all the programmers are on the ground there. And the fantasy is we're all in this together, we're just collaborating. But the fact is that Mark Zuckerberg has stock options that give him 100% personal, individual, king-like control of Facebook.
Same with Tesla and Elon Musk.
Precisely, right.
And
Tesla. And Steve Jobs was the model for that. Steve Jobs was definitely the model for that. And, yeah.
I like maybe just a quick, because we don't have the same culture and tradition in Europe than in the US. And I think, as you point out in your latest work, religion is starting to like come over again as a major entry point to understand what's happening. We don't have this culture of the same time of religious belief, and you talk about this idea of manifest destiny
Yeah.
that today applies to these big tech entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And they're sort of like figuring themselves as godlike figures
Yeah.
and acting like new God. And it's also maybe a way to justify
Yeah.
inequality,
Yeah.
authoritarianism. So can you talk to us European and explain what is manifest destiny and how it can also give explanation to what's happening?
Sure. So I want to distinguish two ideas: manifest destiny and predestination. They're different. I'm talking about predestination. So manifest destiny is the idea that America is the special country that is destined to rule all of the Caribbean and South America. What I'm talking about is predestination, which is the idea that God has already decided that people are going to heaven. Some people, not all. And our job on earth is to figure out, are we going to heaven or not? We don't know. But if we are, chances are God loves us enough to make us rich here. And so this idea starts in the 17th century, and wealth becomes an emblem of salvation. Wealth becomes the emblem of your choice, that you've been chosen by God. That idea travels from the East to the West Coast through a whole variety of Protestant religious traditions. And some traditions don't officially believe in it, but the idea that there are select people among us who have been chosen by God to lead the people, Americans, into some new kind of order, some new kind of spiritual place that God has decided, that's very common. There's a particular idea that America is God's chosen country. That idea is in a number of different religions. It's believed very seriously by many Americans. That, God tried with Israel. Israel is still a chosen, but we are sort of the new Israelites. The idea that we are the new Israelites has been with American Protestants since the 17th century. You hear it now in Southern Baptism. You hear it now in a variety of Protestant traditions. All right, so that idea is really powerful, and people like Thiel can take advantage of it. The other thing to say, though, is that conservative Christianity, since the early 1980s at least, has become an ever more powerful political movement. And the combination of increasing intensity and conservatism of belief and increasing intensity and power, real political power in institutions, think tanks, judgeships, government positions, large churches. As the infrastructure gets built and the theology turns more conservative, you have a very powerful kind of juggernaut. That group has been taking power in the United States since the early 80s, or fighting for it and really taking it over now. And so as tech comes on the scene, in a sense, I argue, they cynically begin to buy into, or at least spout, the language of the people in power. So Elon Musk poses on Twitter with a baby in his arms as if he were, Mary Magdalene, and says, well, I'm not Christian, but Jesus is wise.
And how about Peter Thiel, who seems to be all in the biblical language?
Yeah.
What's your opinion on this?
Well, Peter Thiel, I think, is a little bit sui generis. He's a little bit of his own animal. He describes himself as as an Orthodox Christian. I'm not really sure what that means. I think of him as a kind of neo-Catholic, very, very, very traditional. Right now, he's been holding seminars in San Francisco on the Antichrist.
I know.
Yep. So he's kind of a special case. He gets extra attention, I think, because he's been so successful financially, which again is a mark of divine selection, right? Mm-hmm. So if God loves you, he's going to make you successful. And, just in America, wealth is really a sign of all status. And so he seems successful in that regard. He's also been very active politically. You know that he funded J.D. Vance's campaign early on. I think you've written about that. And, he's been very, very active in trying to get a particular conservative worldview and his money into government. I think he's almost uniquely powerful. There are a few other people who are active in that way. Musk is one, but he's not so religious. Larry Ellison is another. Joe Lonsdale is another. But I think I think Thiel is kind of an extreme case. I think he's kind of a special case. We have to be a little bit careful not to give Thiel too much credit, because he's coming out of a whole milieu that is has very much begun to turn toward the right and has been talking about some of these ideas for 20, 30 years.
And how about J.D. Vance, who's sort of posing as a neo-crusader almost?
Oh, what is the word? What is the best word to use? Can I say?
I would say crusader.
I was going to say whore. I was going to go with whore. Mm-hmm. And I mean that to be as despicable as I can make it sound. Mm. I think he has no soul. I think he has, he depicted himself as a fighter for the working class of Appalachia, and now he is doing everything he can to sell out the people he claimed to represent. He claimed to speak for the poor. He's working to destroy them now. He is a disgusting political figure.
And maybe a Trump successor is trying to work.
He certainly wants to be a Trump successor. And, watching J.D. Vance go to work every day, it's enough to make you believe in the devil. Maybe this is why Peter Thiel is talking about the Antichrist. He's so Machiavellian, so clearly, visibly, cynically pursuing power at all costs, and without any vision I can see about how he wants to use that power. I find him a reprehensible figure. I do think that after Trump, there will be a succession battle, and I'm not persuaded that either Vance or Rubio or anyone else has the charisma to hold the group together. I think Trumpism may really change and become a little less traditionally cult of personality than it is now after Trump goes. I don't think J.D. Vance can do it. I might be wrong.
And coming back to Trumpism, and especially this first year of new Trumpism that has been marked by several extremely concerning things. First of all being the Doge.
Yeah, yes.
And second of all being the current ongoing migrant attacks led by the IC.
Yep.
Which makes us European sort of talk about techno-fascism precisely.
Yeah, good, yeah.
So what's your view on this first year of Trumpism?
Oh, I think we are witnessing an absolutely traditional authoritarian fascist attack on a democracy. Trump is doing all of the things, virtually all of the things that Hitler did in the early 30s. He has identified a minority to attack and to depict as non-human, Mexican Americans and immigrants. He has resuscitated a myth of a formerly glorious America that we will make great again, just as Hitler imagined that there had been a Germany, a 1,000-year Reich. He would make the 1,000-year Reich. We will make America great again. He has fomented chaos, soliciting violence in the street, just as Hitler did with the essay back in the day. The ICE troops now are, in their own advertisements, being compared to German troops to fight off the enemy. It looks to me as though he's trying to turn ICE and some parts of the National Guard into his private army, just as Hitler developed a kind of parallel institutional organization. That's a very traditional fascist move, develop a right-wing parallel to the mainstream state institutions and then take them over. He's also been destroying the institutions that can tell a different story about the reality of the world. So he's been not just attacking government, he's been attacking universities, he's been attacking journalists, he's been attacking scientists, anyone who can hold reality up against what he's doing. He wants, like all fascists do, to paint a picture of the world with himself at its center. And only with that sort of fantasy world can he legitimate his rule. Science delegitimates the oil industry. Academe delegitimates the idea that he can have a special, that he is a special creature in history, that he is somehow God chosen. Journalists call bullshit on all the nonsense that he's doing every day. And
Justice has been convicting him.
Justice has been convicting him, right? So this is really a challenge, and he's trying to destroy those outfits. It's interesting. Here he's following the playbook of Viktor Orban in Hungary, and Putin in Russia, but also the playbook of Curtis Yarvin. And you'll remember that he called for
Rage.
Yeah, rage, exactly. Tearing things down, bringing things down, attacking the cathedral. And for Yarvin, the cathedral is the combination of academics, journalists, scientists who prevent the king from taking power.
Another aspect that is key to me is this dismantling, algorithmic dismantling that the Doge has been leading towards the welfare state in particular, being international aid, or within the US, like the social security, pensions, etc. And today, one of the key actors of this is also Palantir, the Peter Thiel funded, the Peter Thiel's company, actually.
Yeah.
Palantir is on the verge to become almost the state-private OS,
absolutely.
operating system.
Yes, exactly.
What is at stake here with this privatization of everything.
I'm so glad that you're raising the issue of Palantir in the state. I think that's really important. I don't actually think the issue is privatization. I think the issue is integration. So Palantir, Doge and Palantir are working very closely together. Doge is sort of the wrecking ball, and then Palantir is a company that designs, as I know you know, designs platforms for software integration across elements inside an institution. So what Palantir has developed the surveillance technologies for ICE. They've developed surveillance technologies during the COVID event. Fine. What they're doing now, though, under a contract with the Trump administration, is developing essentially a platform that will integrate databases across different parts of the government. And they'll say this is to make it more efficient. But once you integrate the tax records, the medical records, the prison records of every single citizen in the US, you gain the power to map your enemies and attack them. So my fear is not necessarily even that government resources will be privatized, though that's bad enough. It's that they will be privatized in a way where the private company works hand in hand with Trump and creates a new fascist infrastructure. And again, we saw this in Germany, and we saw it with the computer industry. You probably know the history. IBM funded Dehomag, which was a German computer company, a Hollerith card company. And Dehomag very comfortably helped make the Holocaust much more efficient. And IBM continued to profit from that across the war. There's a long history of digital firms being engaged in authoritarian governance. And I think that's what we're seeing here. I'm terrified by the idea of an integrated data system that allows an authoritarian leader to do, as what one scholar called, push button executions. Just push button and find the people.
And ICE is actually very clearly doing this today.
Yeah, I think we can see ICE as the kind of thin edge, the tip of the spear. It's a wedge, and it's both arresting people, some American citizens, never with due process, but it's also extending sort of the Overton window. It's making it more normal for troops to appear in the streets. It becomes normal to see troops with masks. It becomes normal to see troops with armored personnel carriers in the middle of an American city. It's insane. So there's both a practical arresting of immigrants and a tactical, symbolic job of making everyone afraid and feeling like the very things that make you afraid are what you need for the solution. The troops are making me afraid. I need more troops. There's chaos in the streets. I need Trump.
Mm-hmm. One word about the very symbolic war they're also waging, which is on the internet using codes such as taken from the pop culture.
Yeah,
so
sure.
IC is marketing itself as the new Pokemon catchers.
Yeah.
What is the ideological role of such a communication? Make Hitler seem like a pop figure? Or
I think that propagandists in any era lean on the popular culture of their day. If you go back to World War I recruiting posters, you will see that they involve images of men in uniform and women in dresses that are, very sort of 19th century masculine, feminine ideology. I think in our time, social media provide the kind of tools of the day. So they provide a repertoire, a resource. More than that, I think the ICE is working to attract people who live in a world that is a little bit game-like, who imagine that human beings are like Pokemon people. They're two-dimensional. They're not real human beings. My first book was about the Vietnam War, and I spent years interviewing combat veterans. And they told me how to become someone who can kill, the first thing you have to do is dehumanize the enemy. You have to make sure that you don't see that person on the other side as a person. Mm-hmm. If they're a person, you can't kill them. If they're less than human, if they're a two-dimensional figure, if they're a game piece, you can kill them. So I think Trump is, in these advertisements, offering young men the fantasy of the kind of power over people that they have over Pokemon figures in games.
Very concerning.
Oh, deeply concerning. But also fascinating because, like other fascist movements, Trump is organizing our senses, organizing our pleasures. He's offering the pleasures of sadism and cruelty, a legal structure for pursuing those. Those are deeply human, horrible parts of us that can be triggered, brought to the fore by political movements and manipulated. And I think Trump is doing that. Trump is engaging in a theater of cruelty and saying, well, look, the animals are loose. You can either be eaten or help me run the animals.
Yeah, Okay, now I would like to touch on something that is
Fearful, I hope.
a little different.
Okay.
Cheerful, I'm not sure, I'm afraid.
Okay.
No, this is the shift towards the Californian ideology to the Texan ideology. And this Texan ideology, as you write, is anchored in religion, but also in its relations towards fossil fuel industry.
Yeah.
So my question is, we know that today to like sustain this like AI boom and technological boom, energy is like crucial. How is it playing with this shift towards Californian ideology, towards Texan ideology, and more simply, more blatantly, what is Texan ideology?
Great. So the Californian ideology was a dream that there could be this global, invisible interconnection, almost spiritual, between bits and bytes, that cyberspace would float above us. And there wasn't much talk about the cost of building computers or networks. It was just cyberspace. The Texan ideology is built entirely differently. It's born in a time when, digital technologies are clearly extraction technologies. The connections have been made, the networks are in place, and now they hang like a spider web over the social world, and they consume the social world. They watch us, they take our social interactions, they turn them into patterns of data, and they resell them. That's going on in social media, in AI, and in cryptocurrency. The Texas ideology comes from the two things: the state of Texas historically and the new digital conditions. The state of Texas historically is a state devoted to extraction. So starting in the 18th century, when it was still part of Mexico, Americans were allowed to farm cotton in the northeastern part of the state with slaves. And it was one of the very last slaveholding states. It had ranching, where cattle were driven over the land, and the land was designed to turn them into money. And then starting in the 20th century, of course, it had oil. And the oil boom was just extraordinary. So now, as tech leaders move to Texas, they get the advantages of easy electricity, reasonably easy water, big land. But they also enter a space where the use of resources has always been associated with religion. It's always been associated with God having given us this land to be mine, to be taken, and its leaders are meant to be sort of magical religious people. They are the chosen ones. And so a leader like Musk goes to Texas, he gets resources to build his factory, he gets a deregulated environment, and the political leaders that he's working with are themselves deeply religious people who see his work not only as an economic or an industrial process, but as an act of religious power.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And also, Texas is the home base of Elon Musk now, because he's even building his own city, his own company town.
Right, sure.
How do you perceive this movement? Because I've been working myself on this new tech secessionism.
Yeah.
And I believe that Starbase is one example of it.
Right.
But it's maybe even more concerning because it's not like this utopian secessionism that goes onto the sea, for example, the seasteading,
Yep.
or that just picks like a poor country that has to play with economic crisis and just settle as neo-colonialism. It is within the federal state of the United States. So it carves like a new special regime within something, exception regime, a regime of exception. So how do you see the Starbase project, but also Trump's ambition to build freedom cities on the land of America?
Yeah, well, gosh. The idea of American exceptionalism and of states of exception is so normal in our society. It's interesting. People are always trying to build a special way out. It's as old as Roger Williams in Rhode Island. Starbase looks to me like a high-tech version of a much older effort to first perhaps make America the refuge from Europe, and now to take that idea all the way to Mars. We need to find and create the special place where the special people can live. And we need to escape all those backward-thinking, ordinary, slow-moving, not smart, regular people.
And earlier in the discussion, you mentioned that this techno-fascism is highly anchored in racism, and we also see a new wave of eugenistic thoughts coming back to the front, and pseudoscience and racialist differences. Can you talk a bit about this?
Sure. The racism today in America on the right is simply incredible. Much of it is not yet fully explicit. It's implicit. You can hear it if you know how to listen, and it doesn't take much to know how to listen. Years ago when there was a riot in Charlotte, Virginia, Trump said there were good people on both sides. We all knew how to hear that. Racism is organizing all kinds of forces at the moment. First, in a place like Texas, white male leaders are claiming power and doing it through images and through religious notions of patriarchy that explicitly exclude non-patriarchs and especially people of color. You see it in the arrests of immigrants. You don't see white immigrants being arrested, by and large. You just don't. You see Mexican Americans, Latin Americans. You hear them called criminals, rapists, animals. You hear Trump talk about Haitian immigrants who are black, who are ostensibly eating their pets in Minnesota. It's completely insane. This is crazy stuff, but it's all aimed at people of color. And that's fascinating to me. It reminds me an awful lot, again, of Germany and the attack on the Jews. You have a population that has been traditionally disenfranchised, always marginal, always oppressed, begins to get a little bit of power, and now we're going to step on them, make them the enemy. And by making them the enemy, we get to declare ourselves the special ones, the non-enemy, the good leaders, the chosen ones, and in the American context, the chosen by God ones.
Making the enemy and designing the enemy is very clearly what Peter Thiel says, because he's also using Carl Schmitt, but also René Girard.
Yeah, exactly, right.
So that's very clear. What is the juncture between tech and this new brand of racism? Is it because the tech elite is explicitly trying to endorse eugenism, or?
I think, so I have what I call a pocket theory of this. And a pocket theory is a theory for which I have no evidence, I've done no research, but I believe it to be true anyways. And my evidence for this theory comes more from my social world, which includes some of the people that we're talking about, or at least people who are close to them. And, in that world, what I see are people who make their living turning human life into numbers, into bits and bytes, and doing it very successfully. They have discovered that when they turn the social world, the difficult, complex, messy, embodied social world, into bits and bytes, they can make patterns visible, orient those patterns, and turn them into enormous profits. It seems to them as though they have found the key to the organization of the social world and the key toward managing it. And the key in their view is take complex things, turn them into numbers, manipulate the numbers, resell what you get, or use them to govern. All right, in that context, black people start to look kind of funny, right? Because they've been oppressed for so long that when you train your data sets on a historically oppressed people, you might begin to see them, as some eugenicists and others do, as somehow lesser, under-functioning, as though the under-functioning were some kind of natural feature. You might begin to assume that just because the numbers say they are underachieving, there's something natural about them. That's the move I see all the time. So I see it as a kind of unthinking eugenicism. I don't see it as especially principled. I see it as an outflow of this kind of technocratic managerial ethos. Turn everything into numbers and you will see the truth.
That's what Quinn Slobodian says in his latest book, is making the link between hard money, hard science, and hardcore neoliberalism as well. Yeah. My question is, so is this like techno-fascist, very religious, eugenistic and blatantly racist thing also a new way to justify the perpetual growth and status quo of neoliberalism, being confronted with historical crisis of accumulation? So now we go back to the very hard thing. Is that something that you
would agree with that? I think so, absolutely. I think it's, and you can see it playing out in a very on-the-ground way. So, we'll leave Marx behind for a minute, crisis of accumulation, we'll leave him behind for a minute. But we'll say that, certainly AI leaders, for example, are very aware that they're fighting for market share. So too is someone like Elon Musk. They're fighting for resources to grow their business. They are afraid that if they don't fight, they will face a crisis of accumulation. They will cease to profit. They're looking to governments that can help them get the resources they need, keep them successful. To do that, they are saying what they need to say to collaborate with those people. They're kind of coming up with an ideology that allows everyone to collaborate. So I might not be religious, but I say, yeah, I'm part of the mission. I'm part of God's missions. I have a nice child. I'm Elon Musk. I have a baby. I believe in natalism. I believe in those things. And I might even start to believe it because all my systems tell me that that is in fact the way the world works. And all my prophets tell me that God wants it that way.
One last question that's inevitable. How to resist this techno-fascist drift? How do you foresee ways to curb this or just resist to it in the first place?
So there's a wonderful book called Fighting Tyranny, which you may know from the 1980s. And it's a study of how earlier generations have successfully resisted authoritarian regimes, particularly in Eastern Europe. And I think now we can also look to Brazil or to Poland as places where authoritarianism has in fact been resisted. I think we need to work at 3 levels: individual, organizational, and state. At the individual level, we need to do what we can simply not to obey, not to engage. You know, something I see in the States right now that really hurts me is that people are very afraid. So they're not saying things. They're turning away from things they could say. Nobody's watching, but they feel like people are watching. Okay, we have to stop that. We have to instead begin to build solidarity, go to marches together, protest together, talk out loud about difficult things, keep no secrets. Step 1. At the organizational level, so that I'm thinking of companies, NGOs, others, we need to organize from within those organizations to begin to resist things that they might be doing. So at Google and at Palantir, engineers have gathered and organized and protested what their leaders are doing in those firms. I would like to see the same thing happening at CBS, in the news service, in the newsroom. I'd like to see the same thing happening at other organizations. Even if people don't feel that they can protest out loud, there are many ways you can slow the gears of trouble. You know, passive resistance is a powerful thing. Slow walking decisions is very powerful. Slow walk that technology that monitors the Mexican American for ICE. Slow walking, powerful. Resistance. Don't obey, resist. At the state level, we need to hold our leaders accountable. The Democratic Party's behavior has been disgusting, and it's this, the failure to act is second only to the craven, puerile, stunning weakness of the Republican Party. You know, the Republican Party has given itself all over to the great narcissistic father, Donald Trump. The Democratic Party has continued to allow it to happen by and large. That has got to change. And it might mean that we have to elect different kinds of people like Mamdani in New York. It might mean that we have to organize different parts of the party. You know, when we look at, using Fighting Tyranny, when we look at the Soviet Union, you see, and in Poland especially, you see ordinary citizens forming alternative parties. They don't join the Communist Party. They form alternative parties, workers' unions, workers' organizations that may be very local, but that gradually become the home of democratic debate. We may have to build those worlds. It may take some time. You know, we live in a push-button world where things usually happen very fast. That's not what we're facing here. It may take 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, but democracy's worth it.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Pour moi, c'est bon.
Good. It's okay?
Yeah, brilliant.